The world of SWC, episode 7. I've got Jamie here. He's finally decided to switch his video on. On X, he's at the Desert Ape, so check him out. His posts are really useful. Before we get started, just the quick sort of disclaimer. Everything we talk about is not financial advice. It's for information and entertainment purposes only. And any opinions expressed are the person's own. So let's get stuck into it. It's been just over a week since we last did one. Do you want to start with? Sorry?
Do I want to say? The thing is, it's so hard to even know where to start, right? I mean, it's strange because, not to interrupt your flow, but last week I wrote a post titled, I think this is arguably the best week in SWC's journey. And I'm going to be writing an update tomorrow, but I think comfortably that this week was even better in terms of, price appreciation, news flow, updates, sentiment, etc. There's so many things to discuss today. And I'm really looking forward to discussing them. But, first of all, just from a price perspective, we've had obviously an amazing few sessions. This time last Friday or after the close last Friday, they announced an equity book build for, a minimum £15 million at £1.80. Currently when I look, the shares last were trading around £4.20. So that's 130% increase for those institutional holders that participated, which I think is huge.
Yeah, it's massive. I mean, I have to admit, the share price is slightly higher than I expected off the back of that raise. In my head, it was 360, 370 target price, and we're sort of 40, 50p above that.
Yeah, and I think actually, funnily enough, that sort of pertains to a bigger theme that's going on is that, when you look at everything that SWC's achieved in the sort of circa 2 months since IPO, it's broken all expectations. Andrew will also attest to that. And I think, really, there's clearly a paradigm shift that's going on top down, bottom up. And, there's a lot of expectation reset that's been done. Most people before IPO were saying £2 would be a great end of year target. And now, we've clearly surpassed that. And there's a variety of new records or targets that are starting to be discussed, which we'll obviously discuss today. And I think, we're at a really, really exciting time. And the key thing is that a lot of this excitement is supported and backed up by tangible accomplishments. It's not just hype. I mean, clearly there's a lot of excitement around the share price, but there's a lot of execution and strategy that's actually being delivered to sort of validate, all the price action that we've seen since IPO.
Yeah, for sure. It's been pretty relentless, I think is the best way of putting it. Raise by, it's phenomenal.
It's non-stop. And, actually, I think when you talk about the word relentless, I think it's worth giving a shout out to Andrew Webley, the CEO himself, because, he's really been burning the candle at both ends. For background, I run a crypto advisory business, and I had the chance to attend the DigiAsset conference this week in London, where Andrew briefly presented. I had the chance to meet him very briefly, and I wanted to congratulate him in terms of everything that he's achieved, and you can see how hard he's working. And the most important thing for me was that the vibe and the energy that I got from him was exactly as you'd expect. 100% genuine, extremely humble, trying to do his best. He realizes that, he's doing this for so many people. There's so many different causes that this champions, in terms of, his own personal legacy from the SWC original business he built to finally giving retail investors a regulated instrument for people to get Bitcoin exposure to in the UK, which we've obviously lacked for many years. So, I only had a few minutes to meet with him, but, I wished him all the best. And, you'll obviously discuss some of the feedback that you had at Surrey. How was that?
So I wasn't actually at Bitcoin Surrey, that meetup, but I heard that he got a standing ovation. loads of questions were asked. A lot of them we've covered on here before. The general impression was, from the feedback that I've had, was that people kind of working out they either were investors already or they were working out how to invest as a result of seeing him
Yeah.
in the flesh, which is
Yeah,
pretty
I
cool.
saw some of the yeah, really, really cool. And I saw actually some of the pockets of feedback that were sort of coming through. And I think, what's really stood out to me, James, this week in terms of when I boiled down, everything in terms of, sorry, let me take a step back and say, when you look at SWC, there's a huge amount of positives, but when you look at some of what could the potential bear cases be, I think a lot of those have been addressed or partly addressed this week, and those are things such as FCA regulation, which I can discuss a little bit, my own personal interpretation, issues around are they going to be able to continue to raise institutional capital as share price increases. We've obviously sort of answered that with the 21 million share subscription agreement that was announced. And, one of the things I thought was interesting from the takeaway at the Surrey meetup was someone asked, what happens when Smarter Web or, sorry, the broader market goes into a potential bear market? Can this strategy continue? And my understanding is that, an answer was sort of provided again, and a sort of my own interpretation here is that they have a very strong operating business. So, were we to go into a prolonged bear market for whatever reason, SmartWeb have a profitable operating business, which they're able to sit back on. All this Bitcoin that they hold on balance sheet is straight on the bottom line, straight on the balance sheet. None of it's been bought by debt. And that, again, just puts us in a really comfortable position to have a very, very clear path going forward for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think it's clear that Andrew's attitude towards debt is very conservative. He's not said he'll never do it. The option of convertible bonds later might be quite appealing, but for now, it's not necessary. It's all going to plan. Well, it exceeded my expectations, but I get the impression this is maybe how he saw it turning out. I don't know. But going back to that equity raise from the end of last week, it feels like a lifetime ago now, and people are probably over it now. But just a reminder that they aimed for £15 million, and they got 29.3 million. So they nearly double. It was oversubscribed. And he took the amount of money that he wanted to get in order for the dilution to be right based on the market cap and the shares in issue. So that's a pretty strong position to be in at this stage, I would say. What do you think, Jamie?
Yeah, completely agree. And I think there's two very key points. I think, first of all, like you said, the fact that they managed to raise significantly more than the minimum. It was almost 2x. They were, like you said, the minimum was 15. They got just under 30. And I think, clearly, one of the interesting things that we've learned subsequently are the quality of investors that were coming in at that elevated price. We'll come into this specific bit of news in a sec, but there was a press release saying that Jesse Myers was now going to be a Bitcoin strategic consultant for SWC. He participated in the raise. That was public knowledge. And I think, what's even more interesting is the performance post the book build. So the shares, as I said, are now up 130% post the book build of last week. Now, why that's so important is because this is very likely to attract further interest from active managers. So, if you take a step back and look at the UK equity market in general, we are a very defensive market. The majority of the stocks in the FTSE 100, 250 are consumer staples, they're farmers, they're tobacco, they're home builders. We don't have a big high growth tech sector like the NASDAQ. So what that means is that there tends to be very much less volatility within the index. And that means it's obviously harder for active managers to outperform each other and passive funds as well. So by having stocks like SWC, by even having a small allocation, you can effectively reduce asymmetric returns or can significantly outperform peers by, having a small percentage of your fund in something like this. And I think over time, as people start to catch on to this, that's going to help to bring in more funds from active managers. So, that for me is a really, really big point. And clearly there's going to be subsequent effects if you get into like the FTSE 250, FTSE 100, etc. But, worth flagging that we've still not seen any new institutional holders breaking above that 3% level. As a reminder for people in the UK, if you own over 3% of the company, you have to declare. We've still not seen that, but my personal expectation, again, my own view, is that in due time, we're very, very likely to see people popping up on the list, which will continue just to build more credibility into the share price, which has clearly been an ongoing theme.
Yeah, for sure. And I think with regards to that sort of allocation of capital, it's a bit like the recommendation from BlackRock of adding 1 to 2% of Bitcoin to your
Exactly.
portfolio. The Sharpe ratio improves, and it's actually a better bet than not having it in your portfolio at all.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a fantastic paper to get anyone to go see. And it really just does highlight that they did like a matrix just showing by the various percentages that you could allocate to your portfolio, and the impact that the volatility had to your effective return profile. And just, over the previous years, had you had a Bitcoin allocation, how much you would have outperformed and how much that subsequently would have compounded as well. And I think we're going to continue to see that, play out in terms of that news spreading and see more active managers and institutional investors interested in Smarter Web.
For sure. I mean, the next bit, I just want to sort of caution people, these are approximate numbers based off community-based calculations. These aren't direct from SWC or Andrew. But roughly speaking, the cash we have on hand now, including the Bitcoin that we own, we have a total sort of net asset value equivalent to about 650 Bitcoin. Which puts us well over halfway to the initial 4-month target of 1,000 BTC. So it's looking likely, as long as performance keeps going the way it has been, we're going to hit 1,000 Bitcoin within 100 days, which is just incredible. That equivalent of 650 Bitcoin, by the way, would put us at number 36 on the HODL list. It doesn't seem like yesterday we were kind of 100th or 98 or something like that. So I don't know. Every week, this company just keeps blowing my mind, and I can't. My mind keeps saying, surely it's going to slow down, and then Andrew does another thing, and away we go again. The other big news from this week is the 21 million share subscription agreement, which is as much of an ATM as you can get in the UK. Do you want to try and explain that for people a little bit, or do you want me to?
Well, do you want to go first, and then you're in the flow, then I'll sort of just piggyback on, or.
So the way I've understood it is that SWC, they place 21 million shares, and then they give them to Shard, who then sell those into the market. So they are selling shares into the market, probably through a more sophisticated system, but much like you or I would. Okay, so they are selling at the bid price, and they have a sort of bottom threshold, which is the market close price from the day before. So they will not sell if the bid price is below the market close bid price from yesterday. They're also limited to selling up to a maximum of 20% of the volume that on that trading day. But that 20% of the volume also includes the OTC volume, so it's not just the AQUIS volume. This 20% is not a guaranteed 20%. There's people throwing out really bullish calculations of, oh, today we could have made this much money. It's probably going to touch 20% on incredibly heavily traded days, high volume days, but on quieter days, it's going to be throttled back. So, it's not a guaranteed 20% every day. Anything else you want to add on that, Jamie?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much great news to discuss this week. But this for me, I would say, has probably been the most important piece of news that's actually come out effectively since the start. And the reason is because it gives them a completely new and unique tool to raise or convert fiat into Bitcoin. So, to take a step back, one of the things that everyone knows MicroStrategy for has been the fact that in the US, they have an ATM facility that allows them to issue shares, sell those into the market, and compress the MNAV when it's high, and turn that into Bitcoin, and subsequently increase their Bitcoin per share ratio. With SmarterWeb in the UK, we don't have that sort of typical US functionality. It has to be done through this subscription agreement. But for all intents and purposes, it's very similar. But one of the ways, so the only way presently to date, SWC had managed to raise capital had been through book builds. One on the retail side, which, as you know, the capacity for that is now full until next year, or two on the institutional side as well. Now, the institutional side tends to be a slower process, because you obviously need to have potentially institutional demand lined up. There's questions about what price it is. It's from an operational and logistical perspective, it's very time consuming, and it's very, very intense. What the subscription agreement allows them to do is effectively be opportunistic and strategic to take advantage of times when the SWC price or the MNAV blows out to very, very high levels, and allow them to sell shares that effectively can then be converted into Bitcoin. And so, currently, I think when I last look, the MNAV, and again, this is using all community-led data from the Smarter Investment Guy. I think when I last looked, the MNAV was, just a touch under 18x, if I look here, if that's correct. And that's, obviously gone up consistently from the day before, where it was like 15.7, etc. But now with this MNAV at this higher multiple, they effectively have to sell less shares to generate one Satoshi. So it's extremely accretive, or, what people are saying, MicroStrategy sort of came up with this phrase of the accretive dilution, whereby you can sell less shares to generate more Bitcoin per share. And, just to sort of highlight how powerful that is, I ran some numbers, and I think this time last week, the Bitcoin per share for SmarterWeb was around 20 Satoshis, which meant that you had to, based on the share count, meant that you had to own 4.7 million shares, I think equivalent to have one Bitcoin. Currently, the BTC per share is around 157 Satoshis per share, which means that you only now need to own 637,000 shares to effectively own one BTC equivalent. So this mechanism allows them to be very flexible, very nimble, etc. And I think, the key thing also is the fact that it puts a big line, or at least helps to alleviate some of the concerns from bears that, okay, well, how are they going to keep raising money from institutional capital? Who are they going to need to tap up? Who's going to be the next institution to come and participate? And this allows them to sort of do everything by themselves, via Shard, who are an asset manager. And over time, they'll accumulate data, they'll be able to refine the strategy, etc. And, it reminds me very much of when Strategy announced the 21-21 plan back in Q3 of last year, that they were going to raise 21 million by an ATM, 21 billion, by fixed income. They had a 3-year time horizon to effectively do that. They did it within 6 months. And I wouldn't be surprised to see SWC getting through this very, very quickly and potentially reloading it again. Because remember, one of the key metrics that we're looking at is sats per share, BTC per share, both from an absolute perspective and the growth perspective. And that's obviously going to continue to move higher as a result of this new mechanism. So super, super positive news.
Yeah, and I was just trying to do the mental arithmetic on those stats that you gave. That I think that equates to, if you'd put in the equivalent of one Bitcoin at IPO, you'd now own more than the equivalent of one Bitcoin. You'd own 1.5 Bitcoin.
You'd own most Satoshis effectively.
Yeah.
Per share. So effectively, if you put in say, call it $100,000 at the time of the IPO and you bought Bitcoin, you'd have X amount of Satoshis. But if you put it into SWC, the amount of Satoshis that you'd hold via the equity would actually be higher. So I can run the numbers on that.
Approximately 1.5 times.
Okay. Okay, exactly.
More Satoshis.
Yeah, and that's, again, not to divert the conversation too much, but that's obviously sort of one of the questions, or sort of one of the responses to the question of, well, why would people want to own Smarter Web as opposed to just owning an ETF, or when an ETN eventually gets allowed for retail investors in the UK, why would they choose Smarter Web versus just owning it outright? And outside of the cost issue, which you have to pay to own the ETN, here you're actually getting over time more Satoshis per share because of the fact that SWC has access to a variety of capital market instruments that they can utilize.
Yeah, and it's accelerating. You're getting a better return than spot Bitcoin, right? That's why we're all here.
Yeah, absolutely. That's correct as well. And so, I really do think the bullish of this, cannot be overstated. And it's a really elegant mechanism for them to sort of just be very, very nimble and convert that high NAV and just put it straight into Bitcoin. And I really think over time they'll be able to refine this. I think, like I said, I was trying to do a little bit of work yesterday to understand whether there were any exchange or regulatory caps on how much they can effectively issue via this mechanism. I haven't found anything so far. And my understanding is that even if there are, most of it would effectively require it would go to a shareholder AGM vote. And when you look at the shareholder structure for SWC, when you add the biggest holders who clearly have an aligned interest, it's a relatively safe assumption to assume that that this would be passed. So this for me just opens the door to so many possibilities.
Obviously, that would want to be avoided because that would slow things down a bit potentially. But I did similar research and I couldn't actually come up with any sort of restriction or limit other than what was put in the admissions document, which was the rights to issue up to 2 billion shares, I think it was, and we're at 220 million at the moment. So I think there's plenty of room for now.
I think we're safe for now. And it's so funny because that announcement actually came on the same day as they announced their biggest Bitcoin purchase to date, which was the first one over 100. But that got completely sort of like overlooked to a certain extent by the subscription news. And I think it's really, really exciting. And obviously the US market was shut yesterday. And I do think that there'll be a little bit of catch up to sort of as people start to price that in, as well as obviously the announcement that came the day before with regards to the Jesse Myers appointment.
Yeah, I'm just gonna share a screen.
Yeah, and actually, sorry, James, just wanted to flag one thing, which I think ties back into the subscription agreement, is, this week we've obviously seen, or consistently we've started to see the volume profile for SWC continue to rise, both in the London and in the US line, which I think has been super constructive. And that's not only been in terms of total volume, in terms of number of shares and notional traded, but also in terms of the sizes of the individual trades. I flagged in a recent post that we're starting to see much larger clip sizes going through. Previously they'd been in like the 10 to 30,000 pound limit, a range that then went up to sort of 30 to 70,000, and now we're starting to quite actively see trade sizes of 100,000 pounds or higher going through, which tends to be institutional flow. And I thought that was extremely constructive.
Yeah, and I think I saw a single transaction that was posted after close yesterday that was over 1.6 million pounds,
Mhm.
which was pretty cool to see. It's that there may have been a bigger one, but that's the biggest I've seen. So
Nice.
just on the screen share, those of you that maybe don't know Jesse or don't know much about him, this is the thing. This image of his the global assets and how they're kind of divided up. You may recognise it from a lot of Michael Saylor's stuff because he's used it for a couple of years now, I think, since Jesse did the first one. One of my takeaways from this actually was that the total global asset value has gone up from 900 trillion to 1,000 trillion in the 2 years since he first produced this. So, if people aren't printing money, I don't know where that asset values come from. But yeah, so that's kind of what drew me to Jesse initially. Incredibly intelligent guy. He's been around in Bitcoin for ages. He knows his stuff, and he adds a level of credibility to SWC, certainly in the States where he's very well known. And I'm super pleased it was him that joined the team. I'm just annoyed that I didn't manage to grill it out of him when I met him at the shareholder meetup in Vegas.
Yeah, well, honestly, when I saw the RNS come out, my jaw hit the floor because it was literally the equivalent, I think, of a Galactico signing, and like you said, everyone knows him via a lot of the research that he's done in Bitcoin. He's obviously an experienced Bitcoin industry operator. He's been in the sector for a long time. He's very well spoken. He's very well liked, very well followed. And he's obviously built a big business and a great business, which is OnRamp, which is an asset management platform for Bitcoin. And, I think it's going to just continue to add further depth and solidify the credibility of SWC. And the fact, obviously, as well, publicly, he came in for the previous raise, which was announced via the RNS. And that already adds on to like a really exciting team, with Tyler Evans, David Bailey, Andrew, now Jesse, obviously US based, will have a huge network of both crypto native and traditional connections as well to help educate them about the potential of SWC. I just think it was huge. And it was actually funny that day because on the day it was announced was the day, I believe it was Wednesday. Was it Wednesday or Tuesday? I think it was Wednesday.
Yeah, it's a whole
Tuesday,
two.
yeah. So Tuesday, the night before, obviously, was when the geopolitical tensions started to pick up. Then on the Wednesday, the announcement came. The shares were weak. They obviously sort of had a big markdown, I think, just with the broader risk-off market. And I think as people started to get more comfortable, that announcement started to be priced in, and the shares obviously went from I think they touched like 240 at one stage. I remember seeing them at like 270 and went straight through £3, and now we're obviously trading well above £4.
Yeah, I think for the briefest of moments it was £2.35. That was the lowest I saw, which is just
and you, I know I mean, yeah, I wish I obviously had the chance to buy some there, but he's already started to get very actively involved in the community. He announced yesterday some just an interactive discussion around who we'd like to see, Andrew or himself where they'd like to be in terms of podcasts or shows, etc., to continue to get, you know, the word out on SWC. And maybe actually, James, that's a good point to maybe talk about, you know, some of the notes we discussed with regards to SWC getting more viewership in sort of, or increasing coverage from the US.
Yeah, so I mean, before I start that, hopefully Jesse's going to come on a pre-recorded interview with me in the
Awesome.
coming weeks. So keep an eye out for that. Yeah, so I don't know. There's so many names. I think we mentioned a few last week. The likes of Adrian Morris, Adam Livingston,
Tim Kotzman.
Tim Kotzman. So Andrew's been on his podcast twice now. You've got why is my mind gone blank? You've got Grain of Salt.
Adam Livingston. Adam Livingston, did we say?
Yeah, we've mentioned
We had
him.
Anders as well from this week.
Anders, yeah, he did
Yeah,
an interview with Andrew on Wednesday. Yeah, the word's spreading, and we even appeared on a slide of, is it Alex Moss? Somebody Moss, I can't remember his name. At BTC Prague this morning, Smarter Web Company got a little mention there.
To get a little shout out, did it? Well, you know,
I haven't seen the video, but we were definitely featured on one of the slides.
well, I'm going to call it here first. So, by my calculation, SWC is the fastest company to ever do 100x from IPO in the history of capital markets. I did a lot of research this week. Oh, hold on. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Just timed out.
Yeah.
So from my calculations, SWC is the fastest company to ever do 100x from IPO. It went from £2.5p to £2.50 this week, which I think when I last remember that took 51 or just a touch over 50 days, between 50 to 60 days. And hold on, let me actually just confirm the number actually now. It did it 51 days ago at the time of writing. And from my calculations and research, the closest company that had ever come to doing that was Monster Beverage in the US, which took 9.5 years. Now, this has all been powered by Bitcoin. So I can fully see at some point Michael Saylor with a slide saying the fastest performing 100x in the history of capital markets was in the UK, Smarter Web, because it adopted a Bitcoin treasury strategy. That is the power. And I think it's still not really being picked up, this stat. I saw David Bailey talking a little bit about it today. But, you know, from my perspective, there's nothing to stop us, you know, being the fastest stock to do ever 1,000x since IPO, which would be £25. When, who knows? But, you know, that for me is well within the realms of possibility based off the accumulation path, the strategy they're executing, etc. And I really feel at some stage Michael Saylor's going to use that as a key slide of his.
Yeah, I mean, 1,000x from IPO is only like a 6.5x from here, right?
Well,
So
that's exactly it. I mean, think about it. So if we're £4 now, right? Let's just call it £4. Double once, that's 8. Double again, that's 16. Double again, that's 32, right? It only has to double 3 times, and you've seen how quickly it can do this, right? So it's not outside the realms of possibility. And you know, it's funny because people will throw market cap stats at you. People will say, oh well, look, it's overvalued because they only have X on the balance sheet and it's currently trading at this market cap. I think those, whilst potentially those have some argument, like a lot of this sort of rhetoric has to really be sort of ripped up and viewed with a new lens, because this is a completely unprecedented corporate story in UK history. Like, this is the first time anything like this has ever been replicated. And so there's no model to backtest it against, you know, there's nothing to historically compare it with. And so that's why I think, you know, there's a huge paradigm shift going. And you know, a lot of these records are there to be broken. And, you know, in my personal perspective, they will be. And, you know, you can model it out and you can see that there is a viable path to achieving these.
Yeah, and just some other.
Again, not financial advice, just my own personal perspective.
It's all right, we covered that. um, yeah, some other stats to kind of go with that. I think it's that SWC is 3 times larger than the next biggest company on the AQUIS exchange. It's some of its trading days. It has 8 times the combined value of the rest of the exchange put together. Traded.
Crazy, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I read that SmarterWeb and Coincilium effectively now account for over 95% of all volume that's being done on the AQUIS exchange at the moment.
And I think on Hargreaves Lansdown we were the second most traded stock this week, and Coin was 10th. And that there were names like BP on there and Rolls Royce and household UK names. So it's amazing to see SWC beating most of those companies.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, to sort of expand on that a little bit further, Crab Apple, who you should follow if you don't, he puts out some great stats just showing actually the percentage of shares traded as the amount of shares traded as a percentage of total shares, and the total value traded as a percentage of market cap. And the reason why that's important is because it effectively shows you how much interest there is in a stock. It's a metric that that strategy and Michael Saylor like to use a lot to show that they're, again, in his words, effectively the hottest stock in the US. And I believe when I looked last, SWC were effectively right at or close to the top in terms of UK equities. So there's a huge amount of interest, and what it really just means is that pound for pound, they're punching well above their weight, across a variety of metrics.
Yeah, and I think we'll kind of continue on with a few more metrics at this point. I'm just going to bring up the NICS at Bitcoin B21's website, thesmarterinvestmentguy.com. This is the go-to place as far as I'm concerned for stats. It's updated daily. So, if there's a 7 a.m. Bitcoin buy, for example, it will be updated at some point that day. So it's not automatically updated. So sometimes the data may be a little bit out of sync, but it's pretty much done daily. I think BTC per share, that's what I was going for. Firstly, I prefer looking at this on a phone because it's all a lot steeper. But the bit that really catches my eye on this one is the 8% daily growth. Okay, so that's what it is currently. But if you look at the white dotted line, it wobbles a bit, but it's roughly a consistent gradient, which means that the daily growth has been roughly 8% since IPO on the BTC stats per share. If you compound 8% a day over even quite a short period of time, that's insane growth. And the future price predictions that you could try and generate off the back of that, they blow my mind. You don't get past July, and the numbers are already starting to look like, if you told someone down the pub, oh yeah, by the way, this stock's going to go up by that amount by the end of next month, they would call you insane. So yeah, I just love it. It's such a good website.
Exactly. And that's exactly why, again, the 21 million subscription agreement was so important, because it's another tool to help them maintain this accumulation path.
Yeah, it's added a second lever, right? So we're not just reliant on the equity raises, which, as we know, take some time to come through to an actual Bitcoin buy, right? The 29.3 million that landed yesterday was from a raise on Friday. So you're already 7 days before they get the money from when they announce the raise. And then that money is then, as far as we're aware and the way we understand how Andrew's talking about it, it's kind of dollar cost averaged into Bitcoin. I think he's sped up that dollar cost averaging because he was at one time there was a higher proportion of cash to Bitcoin, which implies that he's kind of speeding that up a little bit. I mean, if we, which one is it? Is it that one? No. Here we go. So this is net asset value. He's got 4 days of us having that money in the bank, but it did actually only arrive yesterday. And we made a Bitcoin purchase, I think predominantly from funds that we already had available. Not entirely, but predominantly, which leaves us a lot of headroom. I think one of the things I'd like to cover is everyone's got their own way of working out MNAV, of days to cover, all that kind of stuff. And none of us are going to be right because none of us have actually got the actual balance sheet figures that SWC have. We're all making assumptions and guesses, and we're trying to work out how much it costs them in fees to do that raise. We're trying to work out how long things are going to take, and none of us know. So the way I like to look at it, and I kind of subscribe to the way Nick's done this website, is cash plus Bitcoin, because Andrew has shown conviction to change that cash into Bitcoin over a few days, a week. And so therefore, I trust that cash is going to turn into Bitcoin. So I include it in the MNAV calculation. What do you think, Jamie?
Yeah, completely agree. And I think also when you look at the research report from Tennyson, they calculate it the same way as well. And I think that's the consensus. So completely agree with you.
On the subject of days to cover, this is my other kind of favorite chart, and then we'll maybe move away from the charts a little bit. But so this currently we're on a 52 days on Nick's website. Again, other people calculate it differently, with 23.44p per share net asset value, and the current price at £4.20. What I love about this chart is the forward projection. So just by putting a line of best fit through the net asset value, if we had a 1 times MNAV by the 16th of September, the share price would be £31 or just under, if we keep up the pace that we're going at. That's at a 1 times MNAV. And I remember when he first produced this, I think it was something like £20 in August was possible. And I was kind of like, get out of here. That's a crazy number. I think we're at like, I don't know, £1 or something at the time. And now I'm starting to go, okay, yeah, maybe £32.69 on the 17th of September doesn't seem that outrageous. And that's at 1 times MNAV. If you go up to the 5 times MNAV, you're looking at, why can't I always see that? A very big number, £162.50.
Yeah. A very big number. And it's sort of, you sort of have to scratch your head as well again. And again, it's sort of like really trying to shift your thinking in terms of like the paradigm. And, I think one of the things that I like about this particular graph is that as the more data points come through, as time goes on, you can see the trend continuing to solidify, and that quantifiable data helps you to get more comfortable around, the forward predictions. And there've been some really nice charts on MetaPlanet that have been produced by some of the community members showing similar things like this, but these sort of like quantifiable graphs that effectively show you their path in terms of like BTC accumulation, the NAV, the back out the share price, etc. And so yeah, you sort of like have to take a deep breath when you look at this one, don't you?
Yeah, for sure. I will just do one last thing.
Go on.
Based on cash and Bitcoin, using Nick's website, which is the one that I go with, the calculated MNAV at the moment is 17.92, which, you could argue is running a little bit hot. But I think for me, with the such short days to cover, and we're coming towards the end of the raise cycle, right? So the raise was announced Friday last week. We got the money yesterday. We're literally waiting for when the next announcement will be for the next raise, and it tends to run a bit hotter towards the end of that cycle, because perhaps in front running and anticipating the next raise. I don't know.
Well, yeah, and maybe, James, worth just highlighting again for people, if they want to participate in future raises, there is actually an option.
Yeah, for sure. So there's kind of two options really. One is if you're a higher net worth individual looking to invest more than £50,000, you can contact Tennyson's direct, and they can sort you out. And the other side is if you are registered as a professional investor, and you have an amenable broker that you use, then there's the possibility of going down that route as well. So it's not impossible for, like in quotes, retail to be involved in these raises, but it's it is kind of restricted to certain individuals.
Yeah, and did you want to, one of the charts, I know you've just clicked off, but obviously the BTC accumulation race chart, which I think is the one that
How could I forget
most
that?
well. Yeah, exactly, because that's definitely worth bringing back up, especially as, one of the key bits of news has been that, Andrew has communicated they want to get to 1,000 Bitcoin within 4 months. Metaplanet did it in 6. So, that really is sort of a short-term target for us.
Yeah, and looking at that chart, you've got Cooler well within the sights now, and similar, not far off that. If we converted all of our cash into Bitcoin, I believe we would be, just above, or maybe in line with where Cooler are, or were at our stage, I should say. And then you're only less than 300 Bitcoin away from where Semler were at this stage of their Bitcoin journey, which is just amazing. Semler started with what, 600 Bitcoin, and Cooler somewhere around 200. Phenomenal. In 2 months, we're already showing how aggressive SWC can be, and everyone thought Metaplanet was the most aggressive out there, right? And I'm not saying they haven't been aggressive, they have. It's just we're kind of forging the UK path, and it seems to be working pretty well for us.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what's why Metaplanet is an interesting comparison is because they obviously have a very established equities market. I think they have obviously a very large economy in Japan, the UK, but the key thing is that they don't have an ETF available for retail, which is the same as the UK as well. And I think whilst their individual capital markets instruments are slightly different than ours, the fact that they don't have an ETF, I think, is of particular interest because it's probably like the most like for like. If you compare it with someone like the blockchain group, which is listed in France, there have been ETFs or ETPs available from 21, 22, 23, depending on your jurisdiction and market access. And it's worth flagging, and I think this is a really critical point for maybe international investors to know, is that in the UK, there are 1.3, well, there's effectively 1.3 trillion pounds of capital that sit in tax efficient wrappers, which are an ISA and a SIP. And none of that has effectively had a place to buy Bitcoin exposure. So there's a huge amount of pent up demand and pent up frustration as well from UK retail investors who've not been able to participate or get exposure to the best performing asset, in the history of finance. And so via companies like SWC, people are finally going to have that. And, if you even get a small amount of that starting to rotate in, I mean, you can just start to think about what that's going to do to the share price. Then obviously what that then does to market cap, what that then does to where it is in various indices, tracker flow, etc. There's so many subsequent layers that can unfold as we start to go. But I think, yeah, it's just very, very exciting.
Yeah, it's super exciting. Yeah, and think about that 1.35 trillion, because I think the question was asked on X, and I responded and gave the guy some links to back up my number. But these are people who some of them will be in cash. They're just cash ISAs. Some of them will be in stocks and shares ISAs. Some of them will, they'll be doing the whole, let's put it in the S&P 500, leave it for 100 years, and it might be worth something one day. But there are British Bitcoiners, and there are people that are so hungry to get access to Bitcoin. I mean, just buying Bitcoin on any kind of scale is so incredibly difficult unless you know some workarounds. But just trying to go, I bank with, I don't know, Lloyd's Bank, and I want to send money to a crypto exchange to buy Bitcoin. You've got limits. You've got to go through security. You've got to, sometimes it's just a flat no. It's so difficult in the UK, and I need to get this out to the world in a way, to get exposure to these things. And then when you then put it in a tax wrapper, well, MSTR has been the only option really since MSTR took on a Bitcoin treasury, and there was no option before that. So it's pretty wild. I think there is pent up interest and funds that people are desperate to get exposure with.
Exactly, and just to sort of build on what you, and I completely empathize with you, because it's been so frustrating sat here in the UK and seeing people in America being able to do it, people in the UK being able to do it. I run a crypto business in the UK, and it's still really difficult to do banking transactions. It's still there's a lot of still misunderstanding from various corporates when they see the word crypto or Bitcoin, etc. But I think what's encouraging certainly, and maybe what's interesting is that I was at an institutional crypto conference in London this week, and still a lot of people had never even heard of Smarter Web, and these are guys that are in the industry, right? So we're still so early, and it's very easy if you've been in here since day one, or we're only like 2 months into this. If you've been in this very, very small echo chamber, to think, oh, it's played out, or it's to sort of feel like you've seen everything, the whole journey sort of unfold. But there's still so many people that aren't even aware of this opportunity or this vehicle. And I think one of the things, again, this is just my own interpretation, is the fact that the FCA are now starting to get, I think more constructive on allowing retail to have access to Bitcoin exposure. There's the news that they're potentially going to be allowing for an exchange traded note at some point. There's no date being set, but they're starting to recognize, the fact that, retail should have access to this. And I think, that's obviously a positive in its own right, but as a second derivative effect, to SWC as well.
Yeah, it feels like maybe the door's being opened at least a crack to kind of open up restrictions in the UK, and maybe move towards them being what's the word or phrase, the crypto capital of the world. I think they're trying to shill to us
Yeah.
and then doing nothing about.
Yeah, I hope so.
So yeah, I'm hopeful that at some point that'll happen. We do tend to lag the states by some margin.
Yeah. Have you got any thoughts then, James? Again, it's just us just chatting between ourselves in terms of like, it feels like that 1,000 Bitcoin limit is going to get hit. Have you got any thoughts of your own of like where we go from here, or how this could unfold?
So it was in the Vegas interview that I spoke to Andrew about this. What's the next target after 1,000? And it's maybe a slightly early question to ask because it was,
Of course, yeah.
that was back in May. He sort of said, "Oh, we could go for 2,000," and then sort of smiled and said, "But 5,000 is also a possibility," or something like that. I'm going to put it out there now. I think Andrew should be aiming for 10,000 as the next target. Go for a 10x. What time frame he wants to put on that, that's up to him. But and this is just my opinion. This is not based on anything. But I think, I think 2,000 is too small because we've done 1,000 in less than 3 months, or we will have done in a few weeks. And I think 5,000, yeah, it's good. It's good, but the market's responding to big plans. Similar, I think, came out and said they want to buy 105,000 Bitcoin over the next 2.5 years today, and they've got 5,000 at the moment. These are big numbers that people are throwing out, and I think just from a investor engagement perspective, it's going to keep people engaged if they're seeing like, wow, they're going to go for a 10x. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think the market is going to reward that sort of boldness. I think the path obviously to 1,000 feels very clear now. They've got the subscription agreement which came out, which effectively is 21 million shares. If you assumed all were sold at today's price, that would equate to another 1,000 BTC easily. And I think there's a very clear path to getting up to 10K, and I think 10K should be the next target. It's a nice number. It builds up nicely. Obviously, were they to get to 10,000, that would put them in the top 10. Coinbase, I think, is number 10 with like 9,000. Metaplanet got up to 10,000, now sit at number 9. And, just throwing some numbers around, Metaplanet got up to $1 trillion market cap this week. 5 billion market cap in terms of sterling. And so those are just, some like very loose comps. But I think 10,000 for me would be, a credible and a viable target. And, subsequently, once that was reached, who knows? Could it be 100K? Again, we'll have to see. But I think 10,000 would be a very good balance in terms of like what's achievable as well as what's ambitious.
Yeah, for sure. We are going to have to call it here, I think. We've probably got plenty more on the list that we could have discussed. If everyone can like and subscribe, share the community, spread the word. The community on X is growing at such a great rate, over 2,200 people now, I think. And, that's down to you guys. That's down to you guys posting questions, posting content, Jamie's great write-ups, Zinc's write-ups. They're all awesome content. And, by putting it out there and retweeting and all that kind of stuff, it helps grow the community and get people interested in smarter web. So keep up the good work, everyone. Thank you.
Fantastic. Cheers. Thank you, James.
See you next week.
See ya.